Actually, you don't, okay, so Mark Sandeen. Mark is been charging full speed ahead on climate change since 2005, possibly earlier. Maybe it's some of your first words, Mark, who knows? He started as a passionate community member. He went on to be the first chair of the Sustainable Lexington Committee, and in 2013, Mark introduced a warrant article that requires that all relevant decisions in Lexington take climate change into account. The article was passed overwhelmingly. Now, as a select board member, Mark is working on all of our issues in Lexington, but with always an eye to climate, health, and resiliency. Mark is also the author of All Things Sustainable, a column in the Lexington Times. And every time that comes into your house, I start from the back and look for the pages where I can find All Things Sustainable. Next, we'll hear from Maggie Peard, who is came on March, I want to say, of last year, part-time, because Maggie got her, she got her BA from Williams College in environmental policy and environmental policy, and then got her MS, which she was finishing at the end of when she first started with Lexington, which is why she was part-time, her MS in environmental policy and planning from Tufts. Her master's thesis was on a Massachusetts-based inquiry into the opportunities and barriers to equitable relocation away from coastal flood risks. As a sustainability planner at Kim Lundgren Associates, Maggie worked on climate action plans for municipalities, including Concord, Weston, New Bedford, Watertown, and more. I asked Maggie why she's doing this work, and this is her answer. I see climate change as the biggest threat to our world, and having some small part in fighting it helps me sleep at night. I love that. I agree. Mark and Maggie, we are very thankful to have you both in Lexington as we all work together to create a more sustainable and resilient Lexington. And Mark, I'm going to take it away. And then when you're done, just hand it off to Maggie. Thanks.
Okay. So I just want to make sure before I start, are you folks seeing one big screen or two big screens here?
One big screen.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so thank you so much for the wonderful introduction and all the nice words that were said, but this is all about working together as a community. So the interesting thing, Ricky, you just said in the introduction was that Mark's been thinking about this forever. Well, actually, not true. When Mark decided he needed to learn about what was going on in climate, I went to my first meeting at Lex GWAC. And that's where I started learning about climate. Was the very first meetings were here in Lexington, run by Lex GWAC. And just about everything that has occurred that we will be talking about over the next 20 minutes or so is all a direct result of people in this room and other people in Lexington who've all worked together to make this happen. And I labeled the talk Trim Tab Effect because as I was listening to Bill McKibben speak yesterday, I realized that that's what he's been about. For those of you who may have heard of this phrase before, it's a favorite author of mine. I was reading before Bill McKibben when I was in high school, a guy named Buckminster Fuller, and he invented something called the trim tab, and he felt it was important for society. The idea is if you want to turn a super tanker, you don't go in front of the super tanker, it'll run you over. And even if you want to move the rudder on the super tanker, it would take superhuman effort in order to move the rudder. But there is a thing on the rudder, it's a trim tab, and it's easy for one human to move the trim tab on the rudder, and that trim tab moves the rudder, which moves the ship, and you can change the course of humanity with very small impacts. And so what Bill McKibben was saying, and in our talks yesterday, small groups of people like those in this room right now, if you want to call Zoom a room, are the only thing that makes the difference. And it is this group that made everything that we're going to be talking about happen. So let's talk about Lexington's sustainable history. We were one of the first 5 green communities in 2010. We adopted the Stretch Energy Code unanimously. Also with the climate change warrant article, I think there was one person who said no to the climate change warrant article, but basically yes. And this climate change warrant article is an idea of Ricky's being too modest, Ricky and Jean Krieger, who were pushing me to move forward on this. And so basically we set the tone in the town of Lexington that we should be considering climate change in all appropriate decisions, and also that we should develop a comprehensive climate action plan. Mothers, there's a lot of people in the room here from Mothers Out Front. Mothers Out Front were the ones that noticed that we had 89 gas leaks in Lexington, and one of those at the time, this is about 5 or 6 years ago, was over 30 years old. And the Mothers Out Front said, we're going to label these natural gas leaks and we're going to highlight them. So we got senators, we got representatives walking around town putting yellow flags in the ground wherever there was a gas leak. And boy, it got the gas company's attention. And we started a pilot program in Lexington to plug the biggest natural gas leaks, which, by the way, the gas companies had never even thought about measuring gas leaks before this occurred. So what ended up happening out of Mothers Out Front saying we need to highlight this is we got a pilot program that figured out how to fix gas leaks. Audrey, who was mentioned before, was the one who mapped those gas leaks. Audrey and Zainab from HEAT were the ones who went and met with the presidents of gas utilities and convinced them that this is the way they ought to be managing their gas systems in the future. And as a result of this, the entire country, all the gas utilities in the entire country are now fixing gas leaks this way. It started here. We passed the community choice program with 100% renewables in July of 2017. I'll talk about that a little bit later. In 2018, we adopted the Sustainable Action Plan and the Net Zero Emissions Plan. And in 2019, adopted the Integrated Building Design Policy. I'll talk about all of these a little bit more later. But they resulted in our first net zero schools. And coming back to Bill McKibben in, I think at the end of 2018 or the early part of 2019, came to Lexington High School, spent an hour with the kids in the Lexington High School and fired them up. And as a result of that one conversation, they got 1,000 people out on the football field, and they passed a climate emergency warrant article in town that said we need to end all of our emissions by 2035. Fired up, as you can see in this picture in the corner, the high school students of the town. So what is a sustainable action plan? A sustainable action plan is something that improves our quality of life, our health, our resilience, and yes, our sustainability. And it does it by focusing on 10 different sectors of our town: health, safety, buildings, energy, water, transportation, food, toxics, environment, and economy. Because we said, this isn't just a climate plan, this is the future of our town. So what is a sustainable action plan? There's really two things that you need to think about in a sustainable action plan. One is how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They call that mitigation. And the long-term goal is we should stop burning stuff. We should have no more emissions. And adaptation and resilience is the second part of a sustainable action plan, which says, We're not going to be able to do this fast enough. There will be challenges that we're going to have to address as a result of climate change. And we need to improve our infrastructure so that the town and residents can provide all the essential services they need for 3 weeks, because we are seeing that some of these major climate events knock power out for 3 weeks. So if we're going to design for the future, those are the things we need to think about: no emissions and adaptation of our infrastructure so that we are able to handle 3 weeks without power. We took a look at where our emissions are coming from, and the big takeaways I'd like you to take from this is that 66% of all, at the time we did this baseline of emission study, 66% of all of our emissions, 36% from electricity and 30% from heating our homes, were going into our buildings. So 2/3 of all of our emissions are buildings related, 22% from cars, and the rest was food. A lot of people think, when they think about climate action plans, they think about the town changing their own emissions. What it turns out is the Lexington town schools and municipal and all of the trucks and everything we do are less than 2% of all of Lexington's emissions. So if we're going to solve this problem, we need to focus on the 98% of emissions that are our responsibilities and the businesses in town. So from an adaptation perspective, we had taken a look at our greatest vulnerabilities. And in Lexington, we're not going to be affected by sea level rise because we're somewhere between 130 and 260 feet tall, but we are going to be affected by extreme storms, and we're seeing power outages and flooding. And when you have flooding, you have toxic contamination. And when you have outages, you have in an extreme heat time frame or an extreme cold time frame, you need shelter, you need food, you need water, you need medicine. And we need to be thinking about how our infrastructure can provide all of those things for 3 weeks at a time. So the Sustainable Action Plan, as I mentioned to you before, is a framework for action. And we identified that the number one area that we needed to reduce emissions was our buildings. So we created the first part of the major part of the Sustainable Action Plan was to develop a Getting to Net Zero Emissions Plan. And we had a number of different sub-programs that we are in the process of clicking off: Community Choice Program, Commercial PACE Program. And just this year, we've managed to pass a bylaw that says we should start disclosing the energy use in our buildings. So that is the goal of the Getting to Net Zero Emissions Plan. And we adopted this, the select board adopted this in 2018. So we are now a number of years along the way, 25-year goal to reduce all of our greenhouse gas emissions from all of Lexington's buildings, our residential, commercial, and municipal buildings, and transition completely to renewable energy sources. 2043 is the goal that we set at the time. And there are really only 4 things that you need to do to achieve net zero emissions. One is you need to report. You need to know what your building's performance is today, and you need to know what it is tomorrow. You need to reduce the amount of emissions, and there's really only 2 ways to do that. You can use less energy. You can turn the thermostat down. You can install highly efficient appliances, or you can start using cleaner sources of fuel. And we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about how Lexington is moving to cleaner sources of fuel. The next thing you do is produce. You produce as much renewable energy on site as possible, but in many, many locations, even if you maximize the amount of renewable energy that you can produce on site and you maximize the energy efficiency of the systems that you have on the facility, you may not have enough room on your property to produce all your energy. So you're going to need to buy renewable electricity to make up the difference. So in 2017, we started the Community Choice Program, and we basically made a commitment to the residents of Lexington that the Community Choice Program would be cheaper and cleaner. And those were bold claims at the time. It turned out that when we started the Community Choice Program, there were only 12 other communities in the state that were doing a community choice program. Today, there are over 150 communities that have a community choice program, but here is the amazing thing about this community choice program. In the first 5 years of this community choice program, we've been delivering 100% renewable electricity to over 10,000 customers, and we have saved Lexington residents $5.5 million on their electricity bill while delivering 100% renewable electricity. But that's not the most amazing part of this thing, because one of the things that this community choice program does is it stabilizes the prices of electricity for long periods of time. So while other communities that don't have community choice programs are suffering at the whims of these rising prices on electricity that you've maybe heard a lot about how it's going to be very expensive to cool your home or heat your home going forward. In Lexington, we locked in 3 years of flat electricity prices. And at the current time, right now, from July of 2022 until until December of 2022, the average Lexington homeowner will be saving $53 a month on their electricity bill. And the overall, everybody in Lexington will save another $5 million just in these 6 months. 6 months. We're almost $11 million in savings in the first 5.5 years of this program and delivering 100% renewable electricity. So this is a waterfall diagram that shows what the plan is, the getting to net zero emissions plan. And there's really not a lot of things that you have to think about in this. It's really quite interesting. I mentioned the natural gas leaks. One of the things that many people are aware of is that as you walk around town, you can smell gas leaks. It turns out that in the Boston area, about 2.7% of the gas that goes through our pipelines leaks out into the atmosphere. And because CO2 is much stronger global warming potential methane is much stronger global warming potential, that means it has an outside impact on our emissions. Basically, close to doubling the amount of emissions from our leaks, double the amount of emissions from burning natural gas in our furnaces and in our boilers. So if we can plug those gas leaks, it makes a big difference. When we switched everybody in town, 10,000 customers in Lexington, over to community choice, it was the next biggest thing that we could have done to cut emissions. If we plug all of our gas leaks and we switch everybody to zero emission electricity, and why wouldn't you switch to zero emissions electricity if you can get it cheaper than you can get your regular stuff? It basically cuts our emissions in half. Then the next thing we need to be thinking about is switching fuels. Everybody who's burning oil or natural gas in their homes should be thinking about transitioning to all electric heat pumps. And one of the things that you're going to want to do while you're doing that is upgrading the energy efficiency of your home in order to make that happen. And then finally, we had put this out. Interesting enough, this is from 2018. It says we want to get to a net zero new construction code by 2026. Well, we did that last year, and the climate bill today is allowing us to go forward as one of the 10 communities with a net zero new construction. This is a very complicated diagram, which is showing you where Massachusetts energy consumption is. And it shows you all on the left side, all the different sources, and on the right side, the thing that I really want you to take away from this diagram is really at the top of this thing, it says rejected energy. What that means is wasted energy. You look at that gray lines, that is a massive amount of energy that is wasted because we're burning fossil fuels. And the electricity generation portion of this, basically what you're seeing here is that 66% of all the energy that we put into our power plants to generate electricity goes up the cooling stack and does nothing for us at all. If you go down here to the bottom of this, if you look at transportation, what you're seeing here is that 80% of all the fuel that you put in your vehicle does not turn the wheels. It doesn't turn the wheels. It heats the air, it heats the engine block, it goes into braking, is rejected energy. So the basic idea here is if we are electrifying our transportation and our heat pumps, we are going to save massive amounts of energy that are in that our economy currently is spending money on. And this is another view which is showing you where our emissions are coming from. And this is a much simpler diagram because basically what it's saying is there's really only two places our emissions are coming from: burning natural gas to make our electricity or heat our homes, or burning gasoline in our cars. And so if we electrify ourselves, we are going to be able to reduce basically all of Massachusetts' fossil fuel emissions from just those two things. So speaking about transportation, this is a really fun story. I've been doing this presentation with Senator Barrett, and I like to talk about the fact that in 2012, we had an MIT senior student project who decided to get a hold of the Registry of Motor Vehicles data, and he disaggregated the Registry of Motor Vehicles data for the entire state, and by vehicle model and make and year. And because the Registry of Motor Vehicles inspects our cars once a year, they know how many miles they drive for each year. We were able to determine how much emissions we had in the town of Lexington. And there was some shocking information there. A lot of people think that when you think about how far do you drive a year, everybody thinks 12,000 miles. It's been burned into our brain. But in Lexington, that number is 9,400 miles. So anyway, we have never gotten any more information about our transportation emissions other than that provided by a senior student from MIT in 2012. And I said to the senator over and over in these presentations, gee, you would think that the state would be able to at least replicate what one senior in his spare time could do. But guess what? Senator Barrett put into the climate bill that the state is now going to provide municipalities with the information about how many vehicles they have, whether they're electric vehicles, how much emissions they're producing. And so now that climate action plan that we talked about earlier that has had this sort of straight line on it since 2012 because we had no data since 2012, now we are going to be able to know, are we doing the right thing when we reduce, when we switch to electric cars, when we switch to bikes, et cetera. Many years ago, this is now probably close to 7 or 8 or 9 years ago, the chair of the select board came to Sustainable Lexington and said, we'd like to have an integrated building design policy that can guide us in terms of how we are going to design the new high school that's coming our way. So the select board at the time was thinking far in advance. And so we put together an integrated building design policy that set much higher standards, saying we should have all electric, healthy buildings with high indoor air quality, as much on-site renewable energy as possible with exceptional resilience. And the interesting thing we found is that by setting these standards, we actually are driving higher cognitive performance for our students and lower total cost of ownership. And as a result, we got Hastings School and we got Lexington Children's Place. At the time when we started designing these, there were no net zero schools in Massachusetts, none. And when we started talking to the design team about should we have a net zero school, they said it was impossible. But here we are today. We now have put solar panels on the roof of this school. We put solar panels in the parking lot of this school, and we have a net zero school that has some of the healthiest indoor air quality going and is lower total life cycle cost than if we had designed a conventional building. And now, guess what? Our neighbors said, well, if Lexington can do it, we can do it. And as I count right now, there's probably 20 or 30 net zero schools under design or being built or have already been built because of the example that we set here in Lexington. As I mentioned before, one of the outcomes of the Getting to Net Zero Emissions Plan, the number one tenet of the Getting to Net Zero Emissions Plan is report. And what we found in Lexington when we did our baseline energy, we found out that 2/3 of all of the electricity used in town, and half of all the natural gas in town is used by our commercial buildings. And that 116 buildings over 25,000 square feet made up most of our commercial, something on the order of 90% of our commercial square feet. And we said, if we can just get those 116 building owners to report to those 116 buildings to report to us, we will start to have a way of knowing whether we're making progress or not. It's really interesting. In the law of large numbers, only 9 property owners are responsible for 50% of all the square feet of our commercial real estate, and 50 property owners, 90%. So that has now passed, town meeting has passed a requirement that commercial property owners over 25,000 square feet will now start reporting their energy. The interesting thing to look at in this graph is we designed an all-electric fire station. And you see here, the blue is the amount of electricity per square foot that's used in a building, and the yellow is the amount of natural gas. So basically, the fire department would not allow us to go forward without having a gas stove. They wanted to have gas in their kitchen. So there is some gas that the fire station burns, but not much. And if you look over here to the right, you see that it is basically the lowest emissions building we have in town, because it's an all-electric building. And the town of Lexington is buying 100% renewable electricity to power that building. There are so many people in this room that participated in this clean heat effort. Clean Heat Lexington town meeting passed a clean heat warrant article with 96% approval that said all new construction will be built with heat pumps. And the reason for doing that is because you're going to have a much more healthy, comfortable, and affordable house with better indoor air quality, and it will cost you less over the long haul. Many people are always talking about the fact that they're seeing houses being torn down and new houses going up. We build about 1 million square feet of new residential construction every 2 years in Lexington. So at the time I wrote this slide to begin with, I should have updated it today. It said requires legislative approval to take effect. The new climate bill has authorized Lexington and 10 communities like Lexington to move forward with all electric new construction. Also, another incredible effort from many of the people on this call was Article 17, which said Lexington is in the middle of a life science boom. We're building millions of square feet of new laboratory space. And we said, if we're going to be doubling or tripling or the amount of commercial square feet. Remember, I said before that we are 66% of our electricity was going to commercial and 50% of our gas in the town is going to commercial. If we're going to be doubling or tripling our commercial square feet by embracing lab and life sciences, then we need to think about how to do that from a sustainable perspective. And the idea that we came up with is, let's look at what's going on at Cambridge and Boston, where we are seeing that some of the leading buildings were doing what we called a hybrid laboratory design. Basically, it said, we're going to run the building on electric heat pumps for the first increment of the heating demand for that building. And only after all that heat pump is at its capacity will we allow the building to use fossil fuels to supplement. And the amazing thing is that we are starting to see laboratories built in Lexington. This is the actual proposed engineering numbers that are proposed for 420 Bedford Street in Lexington. We have 2 existing office buildings that produce about 1,000 tons of CO2 a year, and they're planning to put in a hybrid lab that is going to provide something on the order of 25% of all the heating capacity for the building in heat pumps. But the interesting thing is that it lowers the fossil fuel use in the lab by a factor of 10. 90% reduction in the amount of fossil fuel use, use a little bit more electricity, 10% the 10% the fossil fuel. So basically the idea is when these labs, and they say they're all going to be going with 100% renewable electricity, when these labs start up, they will be using roughly a quarter the emissions of the existing offices that are already there. The town of Lexington gets something on the order of 5 times more commercial tax revenue, and we get a lower emissions commercial sector. This is what it looks like from Lexington as a whole. If you look on the left part of this graph, what you're seeing is all of Lexington's emissions total, whether that's from residential, whether it's from driving, whether it's from eating, whether it's commercial. And if we did the conventional lab growth of 3x lab growth, we'd be seeing something on the order of 20 or 30% more emissions in Lexington. And the interesting thing is with the hybrid lab that has been adopted by town meeting, that new industry best practice will actually reduce our emissions overall in Lexington while growing our commercial tax revenue. I mentioned the gas leaks program before. One of the things that we haven't talked about is one of the things that came out of this leak program is that the gas company said, we're going to spend $20 billion to fix these leaks. And so what they've started doing, and many of you have probably noticed, if you drive down Mass Ave down towards Wilson Farms, you know that the road got ripped up. Basically, the gas companies are doing this all across the state. They're replacing the gas lines wholesale. And just to give you an idea of what $20 billion is in today's dollars, it's the same cost as it cost Massachusetts to do the big dig. So while we are fixing gas leaks today, remember the number I mentioned before, Mothers Out Front at the first round said we had 89 gas leaks. We have over 150 gas leaks today, even though we are fixing the leakiest ones first these days. The number of gas leaks in Lexington is growing. So this is still a problem, but we're making progress. I'm just going to keep going here. So one of the things that a lot of people say is when you switch to heat pumps, it seems like it's going to cost me a lot more. But the interesting thing is that fossil fuel prices have gone through the roof lately. And what you're seeing here is that if you're heating with propane or with oil, you're going to be paying something on the order of $4,000 a year. If you're heating with natural gas, you're going to be paying something on the order of $2,000 a year. But air source heat pumps now on community choice electricity, remember we're saving money with our electricity versus Eversource electricity, you'll be about $300 less a year to be heating with an air source heat pump than gas, and you'll be something on the order of $2,000 a year less, whether you're heating with propane or oil. And if you have solar on your roof, you'll save even more. So Ricky mentioned potential savings from the Inflation Reduction Act. And this is a little graphic that shows you all the different places that you can get help in terms of upgrading your home, whether it's weatherization, whether it's solar, whether it's heat pumps, whether it's heat pump clothes dryers, whether it's induction stoves or electric cars. There are something on the order of $14,000 in discounts that you can get from the Inflation Reduction Act on the equipment that you need to buy to upgrade your home. And there's something on the order for a combined income household of about $150,000. The tax credits that are available are something on the order of $35,000 for doing all of these things. And the interesting thing is that while those numbers are wonderful, the savings from doing that work is even larger. And what you see here is if you switch this graph here in the upper right is your energy budget. And not only has natural gas and propane and oil gone up in price, but gasoline has gone up in price. And if you're looking today at what it costs you to drive your car versus and heat your home versus 2022, there are massive increases. But if you had switched to all electric, if you're running all of your vehicles, all of your heat pumps on all electric, you're actually going to be lower cost than you were in 2020. And if you switch all of that to solar, you're going to be saving somewhere between $7,000 and $10,000 a year on your energy bills. $7,000 and $10,000, even in an area which has very high income. $7,000 and $10,000 is a hugely significant portion of most people's budgets. So the interesting thing is that all electric with solar is absolutely the lowest emissions solution as well. So a lot of people said, if I'm going to go all electric, what about resilience? And the interesting thing is that Senator Barrett's climate bill, not this one, but the last one, authorized the utilities to start building microgrids. And Eversource came to the town of Lexington and said, we'd like to build a microgrid in the center of town. What we're looking at here, this is the old Lexington fire station in the center. Across the street is the Stop and Shop and the Walgreens. And they looked at this and said, if we could build a microgrid in this area, it would have everything you need for resilience. There's a gas station, there's food, there's banks, there's pharmacies, there's grocery stores, there's 2 emergency medical facilities, and they didn't put it on their graph, but there's a Starbucks all in this area. So if you're having an emergency, you need all of those things. And they said, we can do this by putting solar and batteries in the parking lots in this area, so that if we are in a situation where we have 3-week outages, this particular area of Lexington will stay running. And these solar panels and batteries have enough power, according to Eversource analysis of how much energy these buildings use, that they will stay running indefinitely. So this is something that the select board has said they'd like to move forward on. It's taking a little bit longer to get going than we'd like, but this is the kind of thing that can happen when we cooperate as a town and as a state with our utilities to provide high resilience for our electricity. And we mentioned Audrey Schulman before. Audrey and the heat organization has come up with something called the GeoGrid, the GeoBlock, the idea that instead of having gas lines running through and underneath our streets, we can drill wells underneath our streets and tap into the heat that's underneath our streets in order to heat and cool our homes and our businesses. And we're working on doing this in the town of Lexington on Hartwell Ave. Town staff is really excited about this. And it turns out a lot of other people are very excited about this. This is a long-term project, but the idea is that we could heat and cool the entire Hartwell Avenue commercial zone with 100% renewable electricity and no natural gas at all by combining the heat pump technology with these GeoBlock, GeoGrid, geothermal networks. I've talked about solar a bunch of times. We have some of the highest growth in the history under a Democratic governor, Governor Patrick. We grew our solar massively, and then after our new governor came in place, we started having programs that slowed down our solar growth. One of the things that we're hoping to do, and again, this is a slide that I've had in my presentation for a year or so with Senator Barrett when we've been going around doing presentations together, and I've said, it's time to lift the 10 kW limit. There has been a limit of how much solar you can put on your roof. And that limit was fine when we weren't heating our homes with heat pumps, and it was fine when we weren't, driving our cars electric. But today, if you want to heat with heat pumps and you want to drive your car electric, you're going to need to have something on the order of 25 kW on your roof in order to do all that. And Senator Barrett changed the law of the land and changed the utilities cap on how much solar we can put on our roofs and raised it to 25 kW. So now all those economics that I was showing you before are now possible. We can save $7,000 to $10,000 a year by putting enough solar on our roofs to power our homes. From a transportation perspective, I've talked a lot about switching to electric vehicles, and we need to electrify our buses. And again, Senator Barrett put into the bill that the MBTA is required when they're replacing buses to prioritize electric. So we're going to start to see this transition happen much more rapidly. The interesting reason I put this picture in the lower right-hand corner in here, many of you who have driven to the Burlington Mall recognize this spot. Basically, the idea is if all we do, everybody in this room switches to an electric vehicle, all we'll be doing is sitting in traffic in our electric vehicles. We need to be doing more than just switching to electric vehicles. We need to be thinking about how to reduce the number of vehicle miles traveled, whether that's through public transportation or one of the many, many good things we're doing in the town, like across Lexington, the Minuteman Bikeway. The select board just changed the speed limit zone in the center of town to 20 miles an hour in order to improve safety and encourage people to walk and bike. So a lot of people say, well, if we're all going to be on electric cars, what does that mean for the grid? And it turns out that it's actually the opposite. If we switch all of our cars to electric, what that means is that we will have 3 days worth of the entire grid electricity driving around in our batteries, so that in the event that there's a power outage, the cars can actually drive your home or stabilize the grid. So we're going to start to see that these electric vehicles can be used in many more ways than just driving us around. And as I've talked about this, we've talked mainly about the climate effects of electrifying and the economic effects of electrifying, but both of those things tend to be outweighed by the immediate health benefits of electrifying. Some of the most polluting things we can do is heat with oil or drive our cars with diesel or use gas-powered lawn care equipment. And many people are just starting to hear about this, but it's pretty stunning, the latest studies that are coming out that show that kids in homes with gas stoves have 42% higher asthma rates, that the NO2 levels, that's what makes smog in homes with gas stoves, is 4 times worse than the EPA outdoor air quality standards. These are things we need to start thinking about. Anytime we are electrifying, we are improving our health immediately. And this group is absolutely incredible in terms of waste, thinking about we're going to have to address how we do waste, whether that's food waste. 40% of all of the food that we use tends to be wasted. And if that goes in our trash, that goes out and we pay for that per ton for that to be incinerated. And then that becomes something that is not useful for the climate. So we're very interested in finding a way to start curbside composting pickup. We're very interested in finding ways to start producer responsibility laws so that we're reducing the amount of single-use plastics in town. And this is the end, basically. So the solutions to the climate crisis make everything better. They make our physical health better. They make our mental health better. They give us clean water. They give us clean air. They address justice and equity because, as we know, there are 33 million people who are homeless right now in Pakistan. They did not do anything to deserve that. When we know here in America that low income neighborhoods are the ones that get the coal power plants, that get the landfills, that get the incinerators. When we switch to electric, we get better safety, we get better resilience, and guess what? A livable planet for everyone. But back to the theme at the beginning, working together with this group is what the best part of all of this is for me, because it builds community relationships. And this is the interesting thing. Study after study shows, this is one study you can find, says that social norms, the unwritten rules of community conduct, how we treat ourselves, matter more than all the incentives in the world in terms of finding solutions to difficult problems. And neighborliness and social cohesion and family relationships are the things that you need to survive the extreme storms of climate change. So at the end of the day, working together is the only answer. And neighbors who know and care about each other make all the difference in the world. The school committee is meeting right now. Dr. Julie Hackett is our superintendent. She has said, and I love this quote, in the happiness equation, there are only two things that matter: strong relationships and a sense of purpose. And we have both of those here in this group today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was dizzying, and I'm sure you all feel that way. I've seen this before, or much of it, and that was my reaction, even though I knew all the things that we had done. So Maggie, let's hear where we're going.
Great. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Mark. Definitely a tough act to follow. Amazing to hear all of that work condensed in a quick summary. So thank you for all of that work and leadership. And thank you, Lexington, for having me. It's nice to now recognize a few more faces after meeting some of you on Sunday. And also just thank you in general for all of the work that you do. Everything I'm going to talk about in this presentation has in some way been touched by or made possible by work that people on the Zoom have done. So I'm so grateful to come into a community where there is so much support and so much that's already been done. So thank you all for that. For those who I haven't met, I hope to meet you soon. Ricky gave a little bit of an introduction to my background. Just finished off a master's at Tufts, really focusing there on kind of climate change policy and resilience. And most recent and relevant job experience is working at Kim Lundgren's Associates, working on climate action plans, specifically for municipalities. And I think of all of that, I am by far the most fired up to be here in Lexington. I think it's amazing to have more of a hand in the implementation and really get to work in a community where there's so much momentum and support for this work, and to be in a town that's really a leader for all of this in Massachusetts. I feel very, very lucky to be here and very energized and motivated by that. So my plan tonight was to first open with just a couple kind of themes and values that I hope to bring into this role, and I think are shared by many of you and many people in Lexington, and then go through some of the initiatives that are going to drive those values forward and that are being worked on currently in the town. So these are just some of the kind of key values that I wanted to pick out. I think leading by example is a big one for how I've been thinking about my role in town, in this community. I think, as Mark said, town emissions are only 2%, but I think the town can do a lot to model for businesses and residents and neighboring communities of kind of what's possible, what's achievable. So I'm excited to, even on smaller scale projects, kind of show what the town is able to do. The second piece is a data-driven approach. Obviously, time is pretty limited when it comes to addressing climate change. So there's a huge need to be working on the highest impact actions right away and not kind of wasting time on smaller things. So I think a big part of that is work that Mark has already talked about, things like establishing baseline data, setting goals, being able to have the data we need to track progress and make sure we're moving in the right direction on all of this.
Maggie, your sound is going in and out a little bit. If you could possibly get a little closer to your...
Yeah, let me also put on headphones. That may help as well.
Thank you.
All right, move forward and have headphones. Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. Great. The next piece, equity. I think this is something that is shared by all of you, I imagine, as a key piece in this work. Obviously, Lexington is a very well-off community in the scheme of things. That's not true for everyone who lives in Lexington. So I think there's still a lot we can be thinking about of who in town really has the time and knowledge and money to take advantage of things like home retrofits, who's benefiting the most from that knowledge and those savings. And also kind of beyond just the Lexington border, we're a part of a much bigger system of inequality. I think Bill McKibben did a really nice job of explaining some of that. So I think something I want to continue to bring into this role is kind of how do we continue to think beyond our borders as well. I think there's a lot of work that's already been, or a lot of conversations that are already happening around that, thinking about where our waste goes and what impacts that have, or how will our own energy transition affect communities that are further behind in that work. And then the last piece here is collaboration. I think that is, for me, both regional collaboration. How can we team up with neighboring towns and learn from what they're doing and kind of have some economies of scale and make this work both easier and more effective. And the other piece of that is within Lexington. So for me in my role, I know I've already been overwhelmed by the support of community organizations, and I think I want to just reemphasize that collaboration is going to be so important, reaching everyone in Lexington. So with that as kind of key themes that I wanted to run through, I'm going to go through some of the initiatives that we've been working on so far, and hopefully you'll see where these themes are being pulled through. So I'm going to start with the climate action plan. I think it's something that really hits on all of those themes. So the climate action plan that's about to kick off, is stemming from a lot of the work that's already been done. It's going to build off of the sustainable action plan that Mark has talked about and the Getting to Net Zero plan. And the goal is really to continue to chart that roadmap towards making Lexington a net zero community and making it a more resilient community. Just for some of the details of that, we're working with Kim Lundgren Associates. They're the consultants on it. And it's going to be a year-long planning process that's starting now, September 2022, and will run through August 2023. And I'm really excited about this. As you probably picked up on, KLA was where I previously worked, and I was really impressed with how the proposal they put forth was really different from what they were doing just a year ago when I was working there. They really seem to understand that Lexington's at a point that we're ready to do what needs to be done. We know that there are some high impact actions that we can really be chasing, and the help we need is really on bringing staff members and other stakeholders together and focus on implementation and giving us the data we need to back up that implementation. So I'm really optimistic about what this will deliver. Kind of some of the key components of that are up on the screen. They're going to do a full kind of formal greenhouse gas inventory for the whole community. And stemming out of that, they're going to do an emission reduction pathway analysis. So much like what was already in the Getting to Net Zero plan, but just kind of building off of that work and updating it a bit. A big piece of this is there's going to be some working groups that are really central to decision making when it comes to setting goals and talking about implementation. There's also a big community engagement component that will kind of feed into this, less of just asking broadly what the community thinks we should do, but really asking them targeted questions about, what's making it hard for you to install solar panels? What would convince you to compost? So we can create implementation that really is effective for the community. And I think a big piece of this also that will come out of it is really powerful communication tools. I'm sure we all were impressed by some of what Mark had on his screen of just seeing the data of how much cheaper air source heat pumps or whatever it is. And I think this plan will produce a lot of striking visuals that we can use to continue to communicate about this. This next piece is the Building Energy Use Disclosure Program. As Mark mentioned, this was passed at the 2020 annual town meeting, and it's targeting buildings that are over 25,000 square feet and includes all municipal buildings as well. And so through this policy, these buildings will be required to report their energy and water usage every May. And so we're working on kind of rolling this out and implementing it now. I've already contacted some of the building or all of the building owners to let them know that this is coming and start to prepare them for the reporting process. This is going to be very important in understanding the baseline of the energy and water use in these large buildings and give us an opportunity to really target outreach about retrofits, energy efficiency, and know where that energy is most, or where that outreach is most needed. I think it could be an exciting opportunity to kind of lay the groundwork for moving towards performance standards as other cities around the country are doing. So kind of a first step in that. There's a lot covered on this slide, but I think building decarbonization as a general topic is going to be so central to a lot of this work going forward. The on-site combustion of fossil fuels in buildings from heating, hot water, and cooking is the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Lexington at around 68%. So being able to decarbonize building while also working to green the electricity grid is just a huge impact that we could have. And I'm glad that this meeting was now rather than 2 months ago, when we now have all of this news coming from federal climate bills and state climate bills, because there's so much that came out of that that's going to help with this. So I think specifically out of the state climate bill, being able to be part of this fossil fuel ban pilot will just really jumpstart this process and kind of show what's possible. And then also the opt-in specialized stretch code that Lexington will be able to adopt likely beginning of 2024 will be another great opportunity to really drive building decarbonization even faster. So those are kind of covering new construction and major renovations. Retrofits will also be key in this. So one project I've been working on recently is this Lexington Heat Smart program. And it's working with a company called Abode that will help us train coaches in town, that will be residents in town, in heat pump technology, and then be able to give consultations to other residents who are considering heat pumps in town. So there'll be that kind of coaching component. There'll also be expert consultations available from Abode for some of the more complicated consultations that are needed. Residents will have access to a quote comparison tool as they get further along in that process. And there'll also be a list of vetted contractors. I know I've already gotten a lot of calls from residents looking for guidance in installing heat pumps and just being lost, not knowing where to start. So I'm really excited about having this program that we can just point residents to. It'll be a website that's kind of a landing page for all of it. So that will be launching this fall, and I hope will be helpful. Another piece that I think is huge in this is just sharing information about energy efficiency measures and retrofits, making sure people know where to go if they want an energy audit or what rebates are available to them. Circling back to the equity component, I think it's really important to bring affordable housing along in this as well. So been having some initial conversations with LexHab and the Housing Authority, trying to get them to communicate more about sharing their experience with accessing mass save rebates, sharing some other programs that might be available to them to get funding to retrofit their building stock. And there's been a lot of enthusiasm from them. The Housing Authority has already done a lot of this work. So I'm eager to continue those conversations and keep that going. Obviously, renewable energy is another piece of this, of encouraging solar, making sure residents have the information they need about how to best tap into solar or other renewable energy. And so another huge source of emissions is always going to be transportation. So I think there's so much work that can be done here. I'm eager to start having more conversations with the town staff and who are managing fleets to talk about what a long-term transition to electric vehicles in their fleets will look like. I've started to have some of those conversations, and I think there's an appetite for it. There's always going to be the concern of functionality and making sure the technology is there first. But I think there's a lot of opportunities to start piloting electric vehicle or electric equipment and kind of begin to phase that in more and more. I think beyond just electric vehicles, there's communication work that can be done of getting people out of cars and encouraging walking and biking. So I'm eager to do some of that collaboration with our transportation services, because there are so many resources that make that so much easier. The bike path, for one, that I take advantage of frequently. So excited to work that in as well. Waste is definitely another huge area. As was discussed at the select board meeting last night, I think there's a lot of momentum and beginning to be a real commitment to move towards townwide composting. So I've been part of those conversations and excited to see kind of where that will land. And I think moving towards having townwide composting will be a huge step for Lexington. Zero waste plan, that's something that started this summer and it was going through the fall, and I think will be another opportunity to really bring in that data analysis. The consultants that are working on that plan are looking at our waste stream and kind of doing some analysis of what are the biggest items that are in our waste stream, and taking that information to make some recommendations of what policies and programs and infrastructure we can bring to Lexington to reduce our waste. On the leading by example side of things, as of hopefully tomorrow, maybe next week, we will have a municipal composting pilot launched in 2 of our town buildings. So 201 Bedford Street, the public service building, and the community center will have compost bins in their kitchens, and town staff will be able to start composting. And so I think just starting those little culture changes are also things that I'm excited about working on, and I think will help kind of just create that culture of sustainability throughout town. The last piece I'll touch on is just outreach and education. I think many residents in Lexington are totally on board with sustainability. You just need to walk around and see probably more Teslas than you'll ever see in any other community to know that this is a community that cares about the climate. But I don't think it's safe to assume that everyone will be able to put in the research they need to make the right choices. So I think a huge part is making sustainability the easy choice and providing information that's needed. So things like providing education about what these federal and state bills and programs mean for residents in Lexington, being able to navigate mass save and understanding which rebates and incentives are available. I get a lot of calls about the community choice aggregation program. I think there's still a lot of residents who are confused about their energy choices. So I think just continuing to get education and outreach out about that it will be important as well. I think speaking to Mark's last point, a big part of this is kind of strengthening community, and I think events that you all put on and other community groups put on also do so much to kind of create that culture of sustainability and just get the word out and bring people together. So eager to continue to collaborate with you all and other groups working on community events and much more, but I will end it there. And want to just, again, thank you all for the work you do, and can open it up for questions or comments to either me or Mark.
Okay, maybe if you can stop sharing, and then if you want to go into gallery view so we can see everybody, what I think we should do for questions and answers. I mean, there are 36 people still here, so it's not it's a significant enough, but I think we can, you can just either use the raise hand function in Zoom, and then I can see who, raise their hands first, and then I'll call on you. And then it could be for Mark and Maggie, Mark or Maggie. So Charlie, I have to ask you to unmute. Sorry.
All right. Fabulous presentations. It's so exciting what we're doing here in Lexington, and that you guys are moving it forward. Just really great. Did I miss something? Or one of the opportunities I thought was electrifying the school buses and even using the batteries in the school buses to use off-peak energy or something. Could one of you maybe update me on that, or did I miss it?
Just didn't talk about it in my talk, but Senator Barrett got the town of Lexington $350,000 grant to buy a school bus. So my understanding is that money has been transferred to Lexington. And the school department has written a new RFP for, we lease our school buses from C&W. They provide the school bus as a service. It's a 5-year contract, and that 5-year contract contemplates replacing over time those diesel buses with electric buses as the town is able to secure them. So I do believe that is underway, and you're absolutely right that one of the best vehicles that you can possibly use to stabilize the grid is an electric school bus, because they're not driving very much, and they tend to be plugged in during the hours of peak demand or during the hours where there's no peak demand. And so they can sort of put power back into the grid when we need it on those hot heat days when the school buses aren't driving around, and then they can recharge at midnight.
Thanks.
No more questions? Is that possible? Are we all just gobsmacked with all of this incredible information?
Ricky, I have another quick one.
Go ahead. And I've allowed everybody to unmute themselves. So if once I call on you, you can unmute yourself. Go ahead, Charlie.
I think I saw, Mark, in one of your presentations, an $800 rebate for an induction stove. Is that right? Something?
Starting in 2023, the Inflation Reduction Act has $840 for replacing your gas. You don't get it if you have an electric stove, and for replacing a gas stove with an induction stove.
And that's 2023 that starts?
Yes.
Put your orders in. I don't know about the backlog. Roseanne.
Maybe this is obvious and it's age, but I'm curious, how come the gas leaks are increasing in Lexington?
You have old pipes.
Yeah, aging of the pipes. That's what I thought.
They call it a popcorn effect. Basically, the idea is if you, as the pipes get older. So I have a fun question for you. Who was president when the oldest gas pipes in Boston were put in place?
Not even gonna venture a guess.
Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln. We have 1865 gas pipes in Boston that are still operating, that were put in place in 1865. And basically what happens is when these old pipes are sort of getting a little bit corroded and you get a leak, they go down and they fix it. They get that all fixed up, and just 100 yards down the road, it pops over there. They call it the popcorn effect.
Thank you.
Electrification will help that. Ray, I see your hand up.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. One of the things that hangs me up as a homeowner and also as a strategist is I'm helpless as to totally electrifying my house. I've got certain issues or certain things I can't do. And I really want the town to do it. So for example, I can't put solar panels on my roof for X, Y, and Z reasons. I want more solar panels collectively done by the town. So I'm always like, is the town going to do it? So I don't have to do it, which the town having the town put more solar panels out that, at the dump there. It looks like a much better idea than me doing that. And I'm happy to pay the town to do that. So could somebody please give me some more perspective on the individual versus the collective achievement here?
Cindy, I see your hand is raised, and oh no, not to answer that question. Ray, I think what you're asking about is community solar. So this is panels that are somewhere else that you can buy into. So like you're a shareholder in that, is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, that's an excellent example of this. The collective should be doing it versus the individual.
Well, let me give you a couple sort of numbers to consider on this. So when we put our 1.1 megawatts on the schools in 2014 and our 2.2 megawatts on the schools on the Hartwell Avenue in 2017, those were generating 45% of all the town's electricity. So just to give you an idea, all of the town's electricity is roughly 3% of the electricity used in the town. So we put all those solar panels up and we did half of 3%. So the fact is there's just not enough room on town property to put, if we covered all of town property, cut down every tree on town property, put up solar everywhere, there would not be anywhere near enough solar to provide all the electricity we need in town. It turns out we have plenty of rooftops and we have plenty of parking lots. And that's what we should be thinking about. And just give you an idea, that picture I showed of parking lot canopies is Temple Isaiah. Temple Amuna, excuse me, Temple Amuna in Lexington. And they did exactly what you said. They used some of that electricity to power their temple, but I think more than half or maybe 3/4 of that power is being used to provide solar for low-income residents. But Maggie can talk about some of the things that we're doing in order to help people with heat pumps, right, Maggie?
Yeah, so that's the Heat Smart program that I was mentioning. The other thing I would say on the solar, we do have a partnership with Energy Sage, which is like a solar marketplace, and you can search for community solar projects there. So they're not necessarily in Lexington, but they're in Massachusetts. So I can drop the link in the chat for that as well.
Cindy.
Thank you. Thanks, Ricky. Thank you to Mark and thank you to Maggie. You both referenced Bill McKibben's talking to Lexington on Sunday. Thank you to LexCan for managing to get him out. It was a wonderful, wonderful talk. And I noticed that you both put in your presentations, sort of like ending, like rounding out and talking about community and talking to others and talking about equity. And I think those are really, really important things. And so I'm wondering, there may be people on this call or people in the community. Maggie, you're getting a lot of, as you mentioned, you're getting a lot of people in the community reaching out. What are some of the things that people can, yes, Ray can't put solar panels on her house, but maybe she can move to a heat pump. There's a lot of people on the call here that can do stuff with their own homes, right? And I know that has happened, or their own cars or anything. But can you talk a little bit about how, thinking about equity, thinking about the community, like maybe what some tips that people on this call can sort of do to have an effect?
I think the biggest thing I would think of with that is just kind of thinking about your network and who you're reaching. I think there's a lot of, preaching to the choir and thinking about what other groups already exist in town that maybe you haven't collaborated with, whether that's an affinity group or a affordable housing group or some high school students or whatever it is. I think maybe just thinking out of the box of when you're hosting an event, who you're publicizing it to, who you're partnering with on it. I know that's something that we're going to be trying to do a lot with the climate action plan of, going to events that already exist that might not have people who are thinking about climate change all the time. So that would be my thought on that.
I would build off of that a little bit. One of the things Bill McKibben talks a lot about is working together as a community. And one of the things that I think about is what kind of community do you belong to? We belong to communities who who love the same things. You may love growing a garden. You may love birds. You may love your kids. There's a bunch of things. Climate affects all of those things, right? And so when you get together with a group of people who love the same thing and you start to think about how could climate affect this and what can we do to make this a more sustainable world, now you have your group of people who are aligned and will do whatever they need to do in order to support the things they love. That's where your power comes from, when you're with a group of people who love the same things.
And I'll just mention, I wrote it in the chat earlier, but Energize Lexington is a landing page that we've created with Mass Energize. And I'll just say that Nathan Scott is on this call, who is now the executive director of Mass Energize. So that site was meant to build community. Like, we have a community of people who are thinking about doing solar or heat smart or heat pumps and other things. You can go to this site and there's steps, deep dives, and you can learn things, and your other community members are doing it. If people share their stories, then you can learn from other people's stories. And that's really the intent of the Energize Lexington website. So it's energizelexington.org, and check it out. Mike, next question.
Thank you very much. This is probably directed to Mark. I heard you mention that for resiliency in the coming, shall we say, exciting climate future, you probably want to have about 3 weeks. And you highlighted how some good battery and canopy work in a particular small commercial and municipal area of town might let them keep going for 3 weeks. But for those of us who don't have power or living in a more residential neighborhood, it's all great to go and get a warm cup of coffee. But if I buy food at the Stop and Shop, I won't be able to cook it. And as long as I don't do something foolish, I probably won't need assistance from the fire department or maybe even the health stop. What do you see as a way that the rest of us who have transformed our homes into carbon-free, pure electrically operated homes, what are we supposed to do for 3 weeks when the grid is down?
That's a really good question. So my first answer is, I think the first thing you need to do in terms of thinking about this from a town perspective is to ensure that you have some areas of critical infrastructure that can support the residents who are in town. So that's sort of why I was bringing it up at that level. When we first started thinking about this about 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, we first started thinking only about police and fire. You know, in the event that we're out of power for 3 weeks, how do police and fire, how does public safety still operate effectively? And then we started realizing that you can send the fire department out or the police department out, but if people don't have food, if they don't have access to medicine, we're in trouble. And so that's sort of why we're thinking about this from a microgrid perspective. From a homeowner's perspective, it's a much harder problem if you have a 1917 house that is really leaky and you're in the middle of winter of what you're going to do. But let me tell you a funny story about a friend of mine in Newton who has a 1917 Victorian. They brought that Victorian down to studs. They put solar up on the roof. They put heat pumps in. They insulated and weather stripped this thing. And it turned out that this exact scenario happened to them about a month, maybe 2 months. I can't remember exactly. After they finally finished this house, they lost power for a week. And the interesting thing is they said because the house was insulated so well, that the temperature in the house went from 65 to 61 over 5 days without any power whatsoever because the house was so well insulated. You could ride through the storm. And their joke about it was they heated the house with 2 humans and a cat. And that was basically, they said that amount of energy was all they needed in order to keep the house warm over that period of time. The other aspect of this is that as we start going electric, I know one of our other select board members is ahead of me on this, has put energy storage into his home. And we've had this happen a number of times. I'm not quite sure how many times, where we've been in a select board meeting, and the power goes out and he's still just fine because his battery keeps him up and running, and he's got solar repowering the battery over time. So what tends to happen is when you have these big storms that come in and knock things out, typically a high pressure comes over and you get lots of sun and you can keep your batteries charged for a while. It
As
doesn't,
long as no snow fell on your solar panels. Right?
that's right. If it's not in the middle of winter, yes.
Right, which is when you need it the most. So you say get enough storage to keep the lights on and the internet up, and maybe the ice cream frozen in your freezer, and insulate your house well enough that you don't need heating, and then the amount of energy storage that you need is
Right.
something within, so we say, a reason. And especially if you can do vehicle to home, if of course the manufacturers enable that.
So one of my friends who's in this business says the top 3 things you should do in order to address this issue that you're bringing up is air sealing, and air sealing. Basically, this is the number one thing you can do in order to ensure that you have a resilient house, whether it's 97 degrees outside or whether it's minus 14 degrees outside. You want to have a highly air sealed house. And that is how you ride through this. The DOER just presented in this new stretch energy code that they show studies where they cut the power. And they said basically for these new stretch energy code homes, they don't see them going below 51 degrees for a week while the outside temperature is 0.
So we'll take 2 more questions and then I think we'll end for this evening. Charlie and then Duncan.
Mark, very quickly, you talked about limited space for solar panels. And I had a chance to mention to Mike, why don't you put solar panels under the high power lines over by the Middlesex technical or vocational school. And he has his lawyer actually looking into that and talking to Eversource. And they've been giving him some back talk. But do you think that might be a possibility?
There's many different places you could put solar, right? There's lots of underutilized places. I'm not sure why it's taking so long, but many of you may recall that there's a group that's in the process of putting solar panels along 128 on the noise abatement walls, sort of on the north side of 128 opposite of Lexington on the way to the Burlington Mall. There's many, many, many places we can put solar. What Ricky was talking about earlier is a lot of people have this idea that maybe we should just chop all of our forests down and put solar panels up there, which is really not the best idea when we have lots and lots of open roof space and lots of highways and lots of parking lots. It turns out that Lexington may not have enough space, but there is plenty of space. Turns out you golfers on the call may not like this, but it turns out that if you covered every golf course with solar panels, you'd have twice as much energy as you need for America. Same thing with coal mines. So all the places where we've been doing coal mining or have coal power plants, if the only place we put solar in the entire country was on coal mines, we would have more than enough electricity for the whole country.
Sounds like a no-brainer to me. And Duncan, last question.
Thank you. Because I'm going to be the last question, I'm going to start with a thank you to Ricky, to Mark, and to Maggie, and let you know, as a Lexington resident who tries to stay attuned to these things and owns one of those 1916 houses in town, this was very eye-opening to me. I am very impressed with everything that the town is doing and the people within the town is doing. Having that as a prelude to my question, I'm just wondering about what seems to me low-hanging fruit, and that is electrifying the town vehicles, especially the smaller public service and public safety vehicles. I'm not talking about the fire engines, but certainly those of us who have electric cars know that it's a good deal. It's cheaper to run in the long run. Why are we not moving quicker on putting our policemen into electric vehicles? And as a corollary to that question, the one thing that alarmed me in this presentation was hearing that we have gas in the fire station because the firemen wouldn't cook on an induction stove.
Who wants to field the,
Maggie, go for it.
Yeah, I can touch on that electric vehicle piece. I actually was talking to the police chief about this week, and the new police station will be fully hooked up with electric vehicle charging stations, and I know he's feeling very on board to kind of make that transition then, and even before that is talking about, well, we could start piloting. They've already started transitioning to some hybrid vehicles in the meantime. So I think the appetite is there. So I think that's definitely something to be driving towards and kind of pushing towards before we're even in the new police station. So I think police department could be a huge place to start because they have a lot of those light duty vehicles. So completely with you on that is a huge thing that could be happening now.
And to Cindy's point, they're highly visible in town. So it sets an example.
Definitely.
And the other thing is, they're the vehicles that idle the most out of just about anything in town. And so what ends up happening is they have internal combustion engine police vehicles have a relatively short life because their engines wear out from idling, whereas that won't happen when you're running an electric car. So we expect that you would see substantially longer lifespans with the electric vehicles than you would with a gas car.
Yeah, and I think that's a transition that can happen quickly once it starts happening more and more. They replace their vehicles every 5 years, and that's, you know, on a rotating basis. So I think that's something that can happen soon.
But you want to make the biggest difference in transportation, start riding an electric bike. An electric bike.
Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. I want to thank Mark and Maggie in particular for giving us your fantastic presentations. It is very exciting to be a Lexington resident and see everything that we've done, are doing, and will be doing down the road. It's really exciting, and thank you for all the really good questions, and stay involved. You know, the community piece is really important. Email info@lexcan.org if you have an idea for a program, or you have a question that you need answered, or you think, well, wouldn't it be great if we could put on something about this? We're always looking for new ideas and good ideas. So please engage with us. Come back in October and learn about the new climate bills, and join us. All
I'd
you
like to hear,
show
I'd
up.
like to hear about how we move into the new world of zero waste. I think there's
Ah.
somebody on the call that might be able to do that call.
Yeah, we will be looking to do some things on that also. So lots happening. It's going to be a very exciting year. Like I said in the beginning, I think Bill McKibben kicked us off and basically sent us out the door and said, get active, join a group, work hard. And I think that's probably what everybody on this call is thinking about. Again, thank you all for coming, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.